Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mommy Never Takes a Break. And this is a special episode because this is my first episode where I am having a special guest join me today for our discussion. So today I have Ezra Esquivel Villegas, and she is the founder of Ascendant Spiritual Solutions. She is a mindset coach, intuitive healer, and manifestation guide. And so I have her here today to talk about something that she experienced in her life from before motherhood and into motherhood. And that is her experience with eating disorders. And so I'm going to let her lead the discussion here and let her begin, like where this all began. How did this become a challenge? And we're just going to flow into that today.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here today. So I started having issues with food pretty early on. Kind of was chunky in elementary school, got picked on a little bit by peers at school and family a little bit. Ultimately, at that age, I was already going through some tumultuous things in my family unit. My parents were never married, so I had a stepmom that married into my family through my dad when I was 8 years old, and that caused a lot of trauma. And by age 11, that trauma had manifested into anorexia. And I started having these behaviors around food where I felt shame. I felt guilty for eating. I felt body dysmorphia. I felt really powerless. And in that time, I had no coping skills. I had no idea what was going on. I didn't even know the term depression. I didn't know what anxiety was, so I couldn't heal myself. I couldn't ask for help. I couldn't communicate what I needed because I didn't know what I needed. I didn't understand what was wrong with me at that time. And of course, like many eating disorders, and especially with restrictive eating disorders like anorexia, it has way more to do with control. And so I was trying to desperately reclaim my autonomy in my life because I felt like everyone was making decisions for me and on my behalf, and nobody was really taking my best interests in making those decisions. I moved around a lot. I had a lot of struggles during that time, and eventually I had struggled with that from age 11 to about age 13. And then my parents started to notice my eating habits were different. They started to really notice that I had an aversion to some of the things that were considered my favorite foods. And it kind of set off red flags. And so, of course, in a defense of my habit, my harmful behavior, I adapted and started to binge and purge, which is considered bulimia. And so I would eat in front of my parents, and I would eat and eat and eat just to satisfy them seeing me eat. And then I would go take a shower and just let it loose. And, I struggled with that from age 13 to about age 19 was the last time I binged and purged last cycle. All throughout those years, it was so much about just trying to maintain control over my life, trying to feel like I have a say in how my life goes because of all of that early childhood stuff. And then at 20, I got pregnant with my first. And so immediately, like, mom brain switched on. I was like switching gears. We're healing. We're growing. We're not going to mess this one up. Right. And so I had kind of this unintentional healing of those prior eating disorders, but I wouldn't say that I was truly healed. I think all it was is I recognized that I couldn't do that to my baby. I still wanted to harm myself at that stage. I was still struggling with depression and anxiety. And I think it was really just the love of another life that really prevented me from doing that. But then as soon as I birthed her, as soon as I was no longer pregnant, I could not stop myself from eating and eating and eating because from already being in a binge and purge cycle, then now I'm no longer purging because I have a life growing inside of me. And then now I'm eating because I'm pregnant and I have pregnancy cravings and I can't avoid food because obviously I need to nourish my body to grow this child. The binging just never stopped after I had her. And I was really emotionally eating at that stage. I was coping with so much stress. All of the unhealed trauma from my upbringing, my adolescence, my early adulthood. And then I had relationship trauma already at that point too. So it just kept coming. And overall, like I now looking back, I recognize it's because I was so hurt and I was unconscious in a lot of the decisions I made. And I don't think that any of it was intentional, and all of my self-harming behaviors. When we think about human behavior, it's very simple. Either you're doing something to feel a feeling or to avoid feeling a feeling. And that's what binge eating disorder was for me, is I had so many emotions that I just wanted to go away. I wanted to drown them. I wanted to erase them. I wanted to forget about them. And so anytime I had an intense emotion wash over me, immediately I'd turn to food. And that was my comfort. And as a neurodivergent, I was recently diagnosed last year with ADHD. I finally understand, like, part of that pattern of behavior was also driven by the fact that I'm more susceptible to addiction. I'm more susceptible to chasing dopamine and serotonin and happy chemicals, because my brain is naturally dopamine deficient. It doesn't process those hormones the same way as someone else's brain who doesn't have a neurodivergent tendency, or a neurodivergent wiring rather. And so in hindsight, it's so easy to see how those behaviors manifested from all of the emotions, the roller coaster of trauma that I went on. And it's really only been 2 years since I can officially say that I'm recovered from all of my eating disorders, from all of my self-harmful behaviors as well. So that's a huge, huge milestone for me to be reaching the end of my second year of recovery.
That's amazing. So what was it for you that allowed you to actually start transforming your life and get to that path of healing to be where you are today? Like, what changed? Why didn't this happen early on, after the first or second time in the eating disorder, and even like right after having your child? Like, what was the thing that changed for you?
So a huge part of it was that natural shift in my instincts when I became a mother, but that wasn't enough on its own. It definitely contributed to me being more conscious about how I was treating my body, how I was treating myself, what I was doing with my finances, how my relationship was, not just with my partner, my spouse at that time, but also with my friends, with my family. And I think organically, I just grew up a little bit between having my first child at 20 and getting diagnosed last year at 25. Like, between that chunk of time, I had already been working on healing. I had already been working on trying to not feel depressed anymore, trying to not feel anxious. And there wasn't any one moment that I can honestly say something changed, that everything got better. I had this desire to live even when I didn't, even when I was in the pits of my depression, even when my anxiety and my ADHD brain were racing and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I wasn't safe in my body. I was just consistently striving to not feel that way anymore. I think eventually I started to look up enough self-help videos on YouTube and Google that the algorithm started recommending me different people, different content that was self-help related, that was related to mental health. And so much of what we consume content-wise has an effect on our brain that, again, there was not any one moment where I had this major epiphany, like, I need to fix my life. It happened so slowly that I didn't even notice how much I had healed until I was already done, until I was already, mostly healed with all of the things that I had been doing. So food has obviously always had a hold on me emotionally and physically. And so I was always looking for different diets to try, different things to help. And somewhere along the lines, that crossed content with gut health, and how gut health is related to our brain health, and how when we start eating better, our depression and anxiety gets better. And so I think just, again, organically, my content started to be curated more towards health, more towards growing and becoming better. And about 2 years ago, I was fed up in my relationship. And I was like, this is not working anymore. He's been unfaithful. He has an addiction to alcohol. And unfortunately, like, I can only take so much as a person. And I'm very forgiving, and I'm very compassionate and understanding of other people's situations. But at some point, like, I couldn't take it anymore. Through that frustration from all of that toxicity, I think was another big push. Like I said, the first one was motherhood. And then the second one was just when I realized, like, I need to leave this relationship. I need to find a way to sustain myself on my own. And ever since that development, that's what I'm doing is just, that's part of what inspired me to create a business for myself, is to be able to prove to myself and to my children, if you want something, it's not going to go away. And that desire to do better, to become a better human, to be a better mom. And back then too, I was so short-tempered with my children. It's like I was a different person, and I blamed myself a lot for that. And so since healing a lot of those, early childhood wounds, my relationship with my own kids has healed just naturally, because again, I've grown. I've nurtured my own inner child, and it's allowed me to make space for other people in a way that during my days of pain and torment and hurt, I wasn't able to. I just wasn't conscious enough to be able to even consider my behavior from an outside perspective,
Yeah, that's really good. And one thing that you are saying, the relationship that you are in, it's funny because it doesn't necessarily have to be relationships, but oftentimes when we feel out of control, a lot of times it's that we have to let go of something in order to be able to move forward and heal. And we don't really recognize that right away. But like for you, it was a relationship that needed to just end at that point, right?
It wasn't just my marriage imploding, because I think it was already built on a very shaky foundation. Because how can one have a strong foundation for anything if you are lacking self-love, if you're just really struggling? Like when we met, we were both in a bit of a struggle. And I think, when we talk energetically, of course, we attracted one another because we were both hurting and unable to cope with that hurt straight on and face it as an adult. And we both had growing up to do. And so it was really a catalyst in what transformation had already been taking place. So I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety at 14. So I've been trying to heal that since then, aimlessly and with no clarity whatsoever, just on my own, because I also didn't have the help of a therapist to guide me through that. My parents couldn't afford that at that time. So I was literally on my own. Just Google was my best friend, and I was figuring things out, and like, how do I stop feeling this way? And what I found too is like, with the information that has come out on therapy and actually changing people, talk therapy is not very effective. And so I think even if I had gotten talk therapy during that time, it wouldn't have helped, because I've always been an open book. I've always been able to talk about my story, to speak about my experience very candidly, even with strangers and with close family members as well. So talking wasn't a help. All the traditional ways of curing depression and anxiety were not helping me. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And I just internalized all of that. And then again, becoming a mother and being able to get outside of myself and wanting better for them, wanting to create a life for them that I never had. Immediately, I was just like, I'm going to figure this out. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get better, but I have to figure this out. And as my relationship fell apart, I realized I'm the only one who's going to figure this out. Like, regardless of whoever wants to help me on this journey, regardless of whoever can offer financial assistance or time or, just talking or just being there, being a support, none of it's going to matter if I don't pull my own weight.
Yeah.
And looking back, I was so stuck in that victim mentality because I was angry, because I was hurt. I was a victim. And it's only until like about a year and a half ago that I made that distinction between I was a victim, now I'm a survivor. And that identity shift is really the big one that I can say, honestly, in the past year and a half, I have unloaded so much trauma that I had been carrying all that time. You got to think, I was depressed and anxious and had no idea I had ADHD until last year. But I struggled with those things for 17 years. Like, can you fathom how long that is? That's so long to be so confused and so hurt and not understand. And of course I blamed myself, because who else could I blame? I regardless of whether people in my life had an effect on putting me in that position, I stayed in that position. All of my confidence, all of my, any semblance of self-worth, self-esteem, it was so shriveled. I was the shell of a person because I didn't have any self-love. I didn't feel worthy of that love. So a year and a half ago is really when I was like, I love myself even though I've been a toxic person. I love myself even though I didn't heal as soon as I wish I could have. I love myself even though I've made mistakes, and as a hurt person, I hurt other people unconsciously. I didn't do it on purpose. I wasn't
Right.
trying to be mean to others or degrading, but unfortunately, that's just something that happens when you're in so much pain and you don't have a way of communicating that in a way that actually gets you the help you need.
Mm. Yeah. So I'm curious, because I know you said that this started for you at a very young age, and you said that your parents kind of pushed you into eating when they noticed that you weren't. Your relationship with your parents now, were you having any kind of resentment toward them or anger? Was there anything that was breaking the relationship between you and your parents? Do you have a good relationship with them now? How is that healing process with them?
My parents were not married when they got pregnant with me. They were friends through junior high. And so they kind of just were like, I want a baby, you want a baby, let's make it happen. And at some point when my mom was pregnant, my dad and her had a fight. And then he went back with his first wife and cheated on her. So
Mm.
already I started my life from like a really disadvantaged place. They didn't stay together after that. My dad had remarried and they separated. I believe I was like 3 or 4 at the time. But then he remarried my second stepmom at 8. And that's when things really got bad between him and I because was and still is in recovery, I suppose, but she's a narcissist. It really affected us because my dad and I were the scapegoats for her. So anything bad that happened, any fights, any negative energy, she directed it towards the both of us. And at age 8, I couldn't understand why, Dad, are you letting this person in my life? And at some point, so there's a thing called parentification, which is when you tell your kids things as if they're an adult. So he used to tell me, she's just jealous, she's just hurting, she's just this, that, and really tried to treat me as an adult in that situation. And I think that made it worse because I'm like, if you know all these things, why are you still subjecting me to this? If you know that it's hurting me and it's hurting you, this is not
Mhm.
family. This is not what love is supposed to feel like. This is not a happy home. My mom had remarried to my baby sister's dad, and that didn't end up working out either. I think they were together less than a year before he ended up moving out, but she moved us to Las Vegas because his son's firstborn lived and was going to high school in Las Vegas. And so we moved there to be closer to him, which took me away from my dad. I spent 8 years in North Las Vegas, and my dad was in San Jose that whole time, so California. So between Nevada and California, I would not pick up his phone calls. I did not want to hang out with him. I kind of resented spending certain holidays with him. I just didn't want to be around him because I was angry at him for subjecting us to her family and her toxicity and her unhealed wounds. And so that lasted up until my mom got laid off when I was a freshman in high school. I had gone to my dad's to start school. I was kind of forced to deal with that relationship tension because I lived with him again. And at first it was really hard. I was very resistant. I was like, that spiteful teenager that was like, you messed me up and I don't have the words to tell you. And I don't feel like I have the ground to tell you this, but I'm angry with you. And eventually I think he just wore me down, really. It's like he just kept loving me and loving me and loving me until I think matured a little bit more and bonded with him a little bit more because obviously we saw each other every day. We talked every day. He took interest in the things that I was doing. He tried to look out for me. He would have to hide it, but he would buy me things. Because obviously if my stepmom found out, it would be a total fight unnecessarily, but that's how she was. So our relationship healed through just his persistence. And at some point I started to open up and just tell him. And then, again, with the parentification there, he never stopped doing that from the time it started to the time I was an adult. But I think by that time, as a teenager and an older teenager from 16 to 18, I was actually receptive to that type of conversation. And I was like, yeah, you're right. She does suck. This does suck. This isn't great. She has messed us up. She's scapegoated us. She's done all these things. And so at least we were on the same page then. So I think it was kind of like an us against them. It was like a survival thing too of like, we both know the tension is here. We both acknowledge it. So we're just going to embrace it. We're just going to be you and me and they're going to be them. And that's that. And so I think that started our healing. Then once I became a parent, I think a lot of my perspective shifted because of course, when you become a parent yourself, you finally understand how your parents view you.
Right.
And
Right.
the love that I had for my children, I knew for certain I didn't want to subject them to the things I grew up with, but it helped me to open up. And he was our primary childcare because I had to go back to work like 6 weeks. Pretty much he would watch her all day long while I was at work. And this was a time where he was actually separating from my stepmom and going through some stuff. So he actually, like, she kicked him out of the house and he was living in a little trailer that was like, he could tow it with his truck. So I dropped her off sometimes in a Target parking lot, sometimes in a Walmart parking lot, sometimes at a park, like a city park nearby. And they just hang out in the trailer and kind of like go for little walks in the stroller. So he was a lifesaver then. And then he was finally ready to be out of San Jose. So I actually quit my job and helped him move to Sacramento. And that's when the trauma really started to come up. And I really started to feel all of my unhealed wounds, all of those empty promises, all of those shoulda, coulda, wouldas came up. And we both, because we lived together, we were forced to deal with those emotions. We were, by circumstance, forced to face each other and to admit where we both hurt each other, because he also opened up to me. You have to remember, this is my experience, but he also was on the receiving end of all that. So can you imagine, you're raising your child, you're doing everything that you think is best for them, and they just hate your guts and they don't want anything to do with you. Like, that must have been so hard for him to cope with.
Yeah.
And at some point I was like, I wasn't mad at you because of you. I didn't hate you because of who you are. I hated what you subjected me to. And we kind of, over time, we had talks. He's a big talker like I am. So we just talk and talk and talk and talk. And eventually I think we got to a place where we could both admit, hey, we both messed up, but we love each other enough to maintain this relationship, and we value each other. And we get along actually our personalities mesh really well. And so that was easy. My mom, I don't know. She was my favorite parent growing up. And I think that was just because she didn't marry a narcissist and keep them around. So naturally, between the two, it was an easy choice to pick her. But her and I have always had a really good relationship. She's always worked really hard. She's been a single parent my whole life. Terrible luck with relationships growing up. And obviously, like, my older brothers and my younger sister have a different dad than I do. So that was tough growing up. But I recognized how hard she worked. And I think I had a lot more sympathy and compassion for her because I saw how hard she worked every day. I saw how hard it was for her to be away from us, 5 days a week, going to work, being out of the house for 9-10 hours a day, and then coming home tired and worn out. And I don't think that she was raised by emotionally intelligent parents either. So, we've had our fair share of trauma and fights. But I had a soft spot for her that I didn't have for my dad. And I think part of it is survival. When we think about attachment in childhood, your parent is your life. If that parent is gone, you die, basically. You literally fear death in your early years if your parent leaves, because that's the way we're wired. And until you're 7 years old, you're not able to care for yourself or provide for yourself, So that age range, I think, was just the foundation for me to bond with her. And then from there, it just continued. But as I got older, I started to see the hole in her stories. I started to, as I educated myself on proper parenting and on healing my own trauma, I was like, oh, you're messed up. You didn't heal all the way before you became a mother. And she became a mother at 15, mind you. So I don't blame her for any of this. We've since, had conversations where we've forgiven each other for our mistakes on both ends. But there was definitely a moment where I was like, Mom's not all that great. And that was so hard to cope with, because she had been my safe space. She had been my comfort. She had been like my best friend up until that point in my life. And I was like, dang, I was so naive. And there's nothing, she wasn't outright abusive. You could see that she is a good, kind person and she means well, but she's had a really hard life. And the cards she was dealt were not the greatest between her parent situation and the way she was raised and the time she was raised in and such. And so I don't think that I have ever truly held blame for her in the same way I held for my dad. So that wasn't as difficult a relationship to mend. Although she was definitely not open to some of the healing discussions that I've had with my dad. She's not, I don't know if she's not ready or if she just doesn't feel as inclined to get into the deeper healing stuff. So I've tried to have those conversations with her, but I think she's emotionally guarded. She's not as open. Like my dad and I are really open, but she's a lot more guarded and a lot more protective of that part of herself. And I think she compartmentalizes it. And I think that's the only way she can cope with all of that trauma, all of the difficulty, because like it's hard. I mean, her story is probably as hard as mine is, if not harder. And so I leave it at that. I leave it at, I don't need your apology. I don't need you to heal for me to love you. I'm just going to love you as you are, warts and all, wounded, unwounded, whatever, and I'm just gonna hold that space for you. And if you're ready to heal and if you want to talk about it, by all means, I'm here. I'm open. Let's do it. But until that point, I'm just going to love her as she is, because regardless of whatever happened between her and I, that tension that was there growing up, she's still provided for myself and for my siblings by herself. Yeah. And that can't be overlooked.
Yeah. Sometimes a lot of people go through specific traumas based on their upbringing, their childhood and stuff like that. But depending on what it is, our parents do or did the best they could with what they knew or how they knew to bring up their own children based on their own upbringing. So, some of us have to actually get to that point where you're at, where you're like, okay, I'm not going to blame them for my situation or what I did go through, because I know that, they had their own type of trauma that I didn't realize at that age. How do we even can comprehend that when we're 8?
I mean, unless one of your parents is like a psychologist or, trauma informed for their job, you pretty much don't. There are a lot of people walking around unhealed. And so that perspective for me was such a big shift that I'm just like, I think what it was is, as a child, we sort of put our parents on a pedestal. And there's always that one point in time where you're just like, you're just as human and imperfect as I am. And you kind of take them off that pedestal and they've just become another person in your thought. And so that was a big change for me.
Yeah, which is huge. It's huge. I've spoken to other people where they have a hard time being able to get past how their parents are, specific things. Like maybe they say something and it hurts them, but the parent doesn't really realize that is a hurtful statement. It's just how they know how to speak. What I often say is that I know that they just don't know. And I don't want to give people excuses, but at least address it. You know what I mean? Instead of living in kind of like this resentment toward.
For me, I think what was difficult is like, do they really not know? Do they really not see how they're hurting me? Especially with my dad, because he knew that he was subjecting us to that. But from his lens, we've talked about it in depth. He had such a scarcity mindset around money. And she was a financially stable option because she had a 9-to-5 with the court. And he was a general contractor, which meant some seasons it was amazing and some seasons it was really dry. So he wanted to have that stability, and her job also came with healthcare and dental care and things like that he would have had to pay out of pocket for if he was providing it himself. And so it was all just that unhealed trauma just continuing. I think that with my mom, it's a little bit harder because I think now that I'm truly trauma informed and I understand the chemistry of the brain and how trauma actually affects us, my mom is very much still that 15-year-old girl who is a first-time mom and has no idea how she's going to make it happen. And I see a lot of her behaviors are just very much, she was robbed of her childhood in a lot of ways. And so now in her adulthood, she doesn't have a desire to be ambitious. She kind of just has that desire to like play and be a kid and have an easy life. And not that she's not responsible, because she takes care of things. I don't say child as like an infant, but like a teenager,
Right.
I think because she wasn't able to finish her development in those later teen years, she's replicated that in her life since of just, I'm going to do just enough to get by. And the rest of my time, I'm just going to do whatever feels good and enjoy. A lot of it too is like through the years, because of the hard work she's had to do, she doesn't really have any hobbies. She doesn't go out with friends very much. She doesn't exercise hardly. Like she just kind of rests and lays down and does nothing, because I think coping through all those stressful years, like she just had no energy left.
Right.
And I have a feeling that her personality would be very different if she made different choices and healed and actually got the help that she needed, because it's not that she's not a smart person or capable or anything like that, but I think those experiences really hindered her from growing. And in order for her to cope with that, in order for her to cope with realizing she may never be a successful person, she kind of just embraced that identity of like, this is it. This is my job. I'm just a mom. I just do the bare minimum. This is it. I'm just surviving. And she's very much in that, like, just get to tomorrow. And it breaks my heart. It breaks my heart to the point where like, I actually have to distance myself from her, because as someone who has done the healing, I was that person for a long time. I was that person who I never wanted to travel. I never wanted to go to parties. I didn't want to go shopping. I didn't want to get out of the house. I didn't want to do anything.
Yeah.
And I realized it's because the weight of existence was so heavy. Just to be alive and cope with all that pain on a daily basis was heavy enough for me to not want to do anything. But she hasn't gotten out of that, and I don't believe that she ever will. I think that she has found contentment in that persona that she's grasped onto. And I'm not too sure. I try not to overanalyze my parents, but she has no drive to do more. She doesn't really have a drive to do better. Financially, of course, she's driven because, of course, more finances means more freedom, an easier life, less stress. So that's one of her few drivers. But aside from that, she doesn't really care to travel. She doesn't long for adventure. She doesn't do anything creative, hardly. It's like she missed so many opportunities to expand herself that in order to justify that pattern, she chose to adopt it instead of trying to change. And it's so strange, because I've never met anyone who has just completely like, it's like she's subconsciously given up on herself. She's subconsciously given up on her dreams of being anything more than just a mom.
Yeah, I get that. I can understand that. And I've actually had that kind of mental space before when I was at my lowest point. So I get that. And unfortunately, some people never heal from it, never move on from it. One thing I wanted to ask you, going back to like your healing journey and from the eating disorder and everything, how is it now as you're on the other side? You said it's been about 2 years since that episode. Is it something that when you're stressed out or something comes into play? Because I say, when you don't live a perfect life, there's always going to be something that knocks us off course, gets us stressed out, have some feelings of feeling down. Is it come back? Like, is it always in your head and you're just able to block it out? Or is it something that comes up for you again when you're feeling down? Those thoughts of purging or not eating and stuff like that. Or is it, no, it's gone? Like, how does that look?
In terms of overconsumption, I find I am susceptible to it. It's usually not pathological. It's usually, I have ADHD. I will hyperfixate on activities during the day and then realize I skipped 3 meals. And then I will be forced to compensate by that. But it's not driven in the same way that it was before. I'm not eating to numb. I'm eating because my brain wouldn't let me get off task long enough to remember that, hey, I have a body that needs nourishment. And so I do still occasionally binge, but it's not anywhere near the same. It's not triggered the same way. It's not to numb myself. It's not to run away from emotions. It's not to suppress anything. I don't often stress eat in that way. Sometimes I do mindlessly snack. I think we all do, where I'll just have I'll tell myself I'm going to split a bag of chips in halves, and then I eat the whole thing. I'm like, So here's actually where my story differs from a lot of people. So of course, my eating disorders started from a place of, I want to control my life. I want autonomy. I want to be able to feel like I'm in charge of something because everybody else is making these decisions that are hurting me.
Right.
And then it evolved into all of these feelings I want to run away from. I want to chase away. I want to numb. I want to escape my life because I hate my life, because I hate myself, because I hate all the pain that I'm in. I hate everything and it won't go away. Ultimately, like all of that shame and pain. And it was one of many patterns that in hindsight I can recognize was self-harming behavior. So I've also, this is going to be triggering for a lot of people aside from the fact that we're already talking about eating disorders, but I have cut my arms, I have cut my legs, I have scratched myself to the point of bleeding. I have used rubber bands to snap my skin to the point of pain. I used to pull my hair. I used to bite my lip or bite my fingers. I used to bang my head against the wall. I used to just any way to hurt myself. So the self-harm was not exclusive to the eating disorders. It was all just, I'm in pain. I have no idea how to communicate this. No one seems to want to help me. The people who want to help me sort of want to help me, kind of make fun of me, kind of are mocking me. My parents, when I got diagnosed with depression and anxiety, they thought I was like doing it for attention. They thought I was joking. They thought like, oh, and it's like after everything that I went through, like, how can you gaslight me like that? You know what you've done to me. You know the environment you've chosen to raise me, and how can you blame me for that? And so the self-harm it wasn't limited to those eating disorders. It was in every part of my life. Any way that I could self-sabotage, that I could harm myself, I would do it. And so once I started healing and learning to love myself, all of those behaviors fell away. I no longer felt the need to treat myself that way because I didn't loathe myself anymore. I stopped blaming myself. And there's no one point in time where I feel like that change happened, where I started to actually hold other people in my life accountable for the pain they caused me. I think it was just part of growing up and part of educating myself again, because the more you know, the more you can actually position yourself in a way that you can actually protect yourself and you stop gaslighting yourself. That was a big one for me, is like, because I had been gaslit basically my whole life.
Right.
I was like, no, you don't really have depression. No, you don't really have an eating disorder. Like, it took me years to actually admit that I had those eating disorders to anybody else besides myself. And so,
right,
like, in hindsight, everything seems so clear of like, no wonder I was doing that to myself. It's no wonder that these were the manifestations of my pain, of my trauma, because when you think about it, I was that child calling out for help without the words to call out for help, without a way of saying, here's what I'm feeling. Help me not feel this way anymore. And being gaslit by my parents just made it worse, because if I couldn't tell my parents, who could I tell? Who would believe me? If my own parents couldn't believe me. And there are some beautiful people along my journey that have helped me. And one of them was when I was 14 in high school, right after I got diagnosed, was my guidance counselor. And she gave me this quote. And I always get emotional when I tell this story, because literally that one person, because she believed me, because she saw my pain and validated me, like, that's probably what kept me alive.
wow,
Honestly. And she told me, people come into your life for 3 reasons, basically 3 things: a season, a reason, or a lifetime. So some people are seasonal. You're going to meet them during summer camp, or you'll meet them at a job, or, maybe you move to a new school for a little bit, or whatever. It's just a season, a period of time. And then there are people who come into your life for a reason. And for me, that's why she came to my life, for one reason. And that was to give me hope enough to keep going. And then there are people you meet who stick around for a lifetime. From the time that you meet, it doesn't matter how much distance or time you spend apart, they're always there and they never leave you. And they're just meant to be in your life in some way, shape, or form. And you're meant to have them forever. And so that gave me enough hope to get through high school. And this is like really sad and unfortunate to say, but one of the only reasons I did not complete suicide before I turned 18 was because neither of my parents graduated with their class. They both dropped out of high school. So one of my one of the only things keeping me going was I'm at least going to graduate high school. I can at least make my parents proud in that way. If I'm ruining my life, if I'm failing in every way possible, if I'm a bad human, I'm a bad person, I'm doing everything wrong, at least there's one thing I can do right, is graduate with my class, because neither of my parents got to do that. I could break that cycle. And then once I graduated, I was like, what do I do now? I didn't think I'd make it this far. I didn't know, and just wandered aimlessly until I started to heal. So it's really insane how things fit together over time, and how in hindsight everything is so clear. But when I was going through it, I didn't even know why I was hurting myself in those ways. I didn't even understand, like, why is this my compulsion? Why is this the feeling that my brain is telling me to do? Because if you've ever had really intense intrusive thoughts, they don't just go away. They just manifested more and bigger and stronger until I couldn't fight them. And then I would just give into the behavior, because what else is there to do? There's no other way for me to cope. I never learned how to cope in a healthy way. So it was just toxicity and the cycles. And part of it is my brain wired through my upbringing from that lens, from that perspective of the world sucks, my life sucks, my parents suck, everyone sucks. Like, nothing's ever going to get better because everything that I've tried hasn't worked yet. And so I think back to, like, how am I even standing here? Because what we've talked about during this podcast is such a small portion of what's actually happened in my life. And for me to be standing and not just surviving, but actually to have an optimistic outlook on life is insanity. It feels unreal. It almost feels weird for me to be as happy as I am today after everything I've gone through, because it's like, what reason do I have to be happy? Look at everything I've been through. But that's what brings me to where I am at in my business, is like, happiness is a choice. Thriving is a choice. Healing is a choice. And it is a luxury as much as it is a choice. But if you have that ability, choose it, because nobody's going to choose for me. Nobody's going to make me happy. And that was really hard too, is taking accountability for I was a victim, but I chose to stay there. I chose to stay unhappy. Even once I learned the tools, even once I learned how to cope a little bit. I still had struggled with, it's like when you tell yourself you're going to go to the gym on January 1st, and then you go for like 10 minutes and it's crowded and you hate it, and then you never go again. But you keep telling yourself, oh, I'll go this next day. I'll go this day. I'll go this. It's like, I kept telling myself, I'll heal, I'll do this, I'll journal, I'll find a therapist whenever I get the money, and just pushing the mile marker out, basically, is what I was doing for years. Years. And now I'm just like, I could have healed so much sooner, but the truth is I couldn't. So I wasn't ready. I think in hindsight, we want to say we could do better, but we are all out here doing the very best we can. And sometimes it's crap. And that's just life.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to wrap up by asking you if you have any tips or some word of encouragement for anybody that's listening today. Maybe they're going through something similar, or they're in the midst of their own eating disorder. What can you expound on them today as they're listening?
So like we touched on before, human behavior is so simple. And it all comes down to, what do you want to feel? What are you trying to feel? And what are you trying to avoid feeling? So if you are struggling, whether it's depression, anxiety, eating disorders, addiction, or just any type of self-sabotaging behavior, what are you avoiding feeling? What are you running away from? What emotion are you trying to escape that this coping mechanism is doing for you? Yeah. So, I was running away from every possible negative emotion. I was running away from embarrassment, shame, guilt, remorse. I was running away from sadness and anything I could do to not feel that. And so you have to think, like, when you're choosing between depression and self-harmful behaviors, they both hurt, but one you're choosing. And that's the key part, is you're choosing that pain because you're not choosing the other pain, but it's there.
Yeah.
So if we flip that around and we recognize it's a choice to continue to self-harm. As much as it's an illness, we can also choose to heal.
Right.
We can also make the choice to ask for help. And it is hard, and you're going to be rejected sometimes. But if you never stop asking for help, the help will become a reality, because you can't keep asking for help and people tell you no forever. And in so many ways, there's just been a single person sometimes, like that guidance counselor. Sometimes it was just a random stranger complimenting me. I had a stranger compliment me singing on an airplane once, and that was enough of a confidence boost to keep me from not feeling that negativity for some time. And really, it's those moments, it's those little days in between the darkness that keep you hoping for more. They keep you striving for more. And so for anyone going through those struggles, I know you hate to hear it gets better, but it does. And it gets better when you make it better. It gets better when you say, I am so tired of feeling like this. I'm so tired of living like this. I'm fed up. I can't do this anymore. I will literally die if I keep going down this road. And, it only takes a tiny bit of a belief to get you to the next thing. And in my healing, it took one person showing up for me consistently for me to be like, if this person can show up for me, I can show up for myself. Yeah. And then it was the next person. And you get there a little at a time. It feels so hopeless in the beginning, but it feels hopeless because you are unable to see the world in a different lens.
Right.
And so sometimes it's hard to get outside of yourself when you have experienced something that wires your brain to see more negativity. But we actually have this part of our brains. It's called the reticular activating system. And it's a feature of our survival where it's meant to be used for certain threats and certain foods, right? So it's the part of your brain that says, if I eat these berries and I don't die, I better remember what those berries look like so I can keep eating them. Where if I get bit by a snake and I almost die, I better remember what that snake looks like so I avoid it. Yeah. So in the same way, if you've ever shopped for a car, you will see that car everywhere you go. All of a sudden, those cars were always there, but now you're paying attention to them, right? Mm-hmm. So our brains are programmable. Right. So you can choose to focus on positive things. This can mean surrounding yourself with positive people. This can mean following accounts on social media that post positive quotes every single day. And they're out there, and there's tons of them. And just to choose, I'm going to tell my brain, my happiness is important. Mm-hmm. It matters to me. It matters to me to feel good. It matters to me to heal. It's important that I fix whatever wounds are here. And you will literally rewire your brain to look for opportunities to heal, to look for reasons to be happy, to look for those little glimmers in the darkness. And you just chase them and chase them and chase them until you're on the other side of that.
Thank you. I'm so excited that you decided to come today and share with us, share your story and be vulnerable with us, because at the end of the day, when we're sharing the things that we've been through, baggage that we've had, it's about us being vulnerable, but we're also sharing our message and encouraging other people. So excited to have you. And before we end today's podcast, of course, I want to give you a couple of minutes to share with everybody what you do. I know I gave you a quick introduction, but if you could let people know a little bit more like what exactly it is, your title that I mentioned. So that way, if anybody resonates with you and, they're feeling called to maybe work with you or just even want to follow you on social media, let them know how they can find you.
Yeah. So first off, I want to tell you all, vulnerability is strength. It takes courage to share your feelings with other people. And that was the hardest part of the journey overall, is to actually get someone to make me feel safe enough to open up was huge. And so in my coaching, I am all about creating that safe space. I'm all about sharing my own vulnerability, my own humanness, my own mistakes, my own failures. And I'm so candid about it. We've talked about a small fraction of my story. So I am always sharing different tidbits and finding a way to relate it to people. So that's huge in my coaching. And that's the approach I take, is just, this is a safe space. I am a safe person to tell your deepest, darkest secrets to, and I will not judge you and I will not turn you away. And, I may have to step away from coaching you if I don't have the skill set, and I can recommend someone who is a therapist and actually well versed in mental health care, because sometimes that's just outside of my scope of expertise, but I'll always be there when you're ready for coaching. So I take a very holistic approach to my coaching. So I'm not just rah mindset, toxic positivity. I'm actually, let's turn this mindset thing on its head and go against the grain in the coaching industry and actually turn it into something that is honestly positive. And so a lot of the work I do is actually, it's science-based, but there's spiritual principles that are kind of enmeshed in it. So I try to back spirituality with science as much as possible because I'm a very rational, practical person. That's my background. That's where I came from. So spirituality to me was like taking my science approach to the next level and like, how far can we stretch science? How much of spirituality can we prove? That's something I'm always really interested in, so that people who are really spiritual can get the benefits of the science side of it. People who are more practical and logical thinkers can actually benefit from some of the spiritual principles that are out there. I also started offering intuitive healing. And to me, that is just, I am going to listen to your story and I'm going to tailor a healing session that actually targets your wounds specifically. And I will use my own experiences, my own knowledge, my trauma-informed background, both personally and professionally, to do that so that we can actually get to the root of whatever fear, whatever self-doubt, whatever limiting belief you are struggling with, so we can actually fully heal and not just push through. A lot of coaching is very much like push through your problems, and I'm much more nurturing and let's actually sit with these problems and let's see where they started and let's pick them apart. Let's analyze them. Let's figure things out so we can make sure this never happens again. I am literally in the coaching business to be obsolete. I would love to be in a world where nobody needs a mindset coach. Nobody needs a healer. Like, I would love that. So I take as much care and time as possible to actually tailor my programs to the people who need them. So I focus on overcoming fear and self-doubt, but every experience is different. Everyone needs something a little bit different. So I've become quite adaptable to meeting people wherever they are in their healing journey. So if you feel like this is the first time you've ever experienced trauma and you don't know what to do, you don't know where to start, I'm still your person. And then if you've done a lot of the healing work on your own, but you're ready for that little kick in the butt to take things to the next level, I'm also your person. So I have a very diverse skill set that I can apply to different people at different stages in their life. The main thing I want to mention is I serve women and queers who identify with feminine energy. So I don't work with males and I don't work with anyone who identifies as masculine or as a man. I work primarily just with people who identify with that feminine energy. That's just something I find works best because I'm actually quite a masculine woman myself. So I think that pairs really well. I have this nurturing side to me where a lot of people do feel safe in my presence. They do feel really comforted and, nurtured, but I can also bring in that masculine energy and say, okay, it's time to stop making those excuses. It's time to start showing up for yourself. It's time to start taking things to the next level. So I love that I have this fluidity to do both. I think it really sets me apart from different coaches, and especially in the spiritual niche, it sets me apart vastly, having that desire to back things with science and fact. And of course, everything is an open space for me. It's all safe. You can't tell me anything that will make me scared to talk to you. There's nothing you can tell me about your story that I haven't already experienced in some ways myself. And there's very few things that people have told me that I'm like, wow, that's a big shock to me, because I have had such a tumultuous life myself. I have a free goal setting class coming up November 26th so that we can all get a running start. That will be in my coaching group on Facebook, Ascendant Spiritual Solutions. And then I'm under the same name on Instagram, ascendant.spiritual.solutions. And that goal setting class will be in the group permanently. So it's not going to be deleted. So even if you don't make it to the group by that time, it'll still be in the group ready to view at any time. Yeah. So that's pretty much all I've got going on right now. I am building a signature program that I'm working on, but it's not quite ready yet. So you'll have to stay in the group or follow socials to stay tuned with that.
Awesome. Well, for anybody that was listening and couldn't write all that down, definitely make sure to put all that information in the show notes so that you could check it out and be able to get access to that quickly. But again, I wanted to thank you, Ezra, for being on the show and for sharing your story and being vulnerable with us and just allowing us to really start sharpening our perspectives on life. So
yeah, it's been a pleasure. It's always nice chatting with you.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for today's episode, and we'll be back again next week on Tuesday. Bye, everyone.